The vampire raised his eyebrows in wonder. I was convinced that he was only overzealous, that in his love for God he had perhaps gone too far. Then he told me about the visions. Both Saint Dominique and the Blessed Virgin Mary had come to him in the oratory. They had told him he was to sell all of our property in Louisiana, everything we owned, and use the money to do God's work in France. My brother was to be the great religious leader to return the country to its former fervor, to turn the tide against atheism and the revolution. Of course, he had no money of his own. I was to sell the plantations and our townhouses in New Orleans and give the money to him. Again, the vampire stopped, and the boy sat motionless, regarding him astonished. Excuse me, he whispered. What did you say? Did you sell the plantations? No, said the vampire, his voice calm as it had been from the start. I laughed at him, and he became incensed. He insisted that his command come from the Virgin herself. Who was I to disregard it? Who indeed? He asked softly, as if he were talking of us again. Who indeed? And the more he tried to convince me, the more I laughed. It was nonsense, I told him, the product of immature and even morbid mind. The oratory was a mistake, I said to him. I would have it torn down at once. But I remember the feeling. He would go out to the school in New Orleans and get such insane notions out of his head. I don't remember what all I said, but I remember the feeling. Behind all the contemptuous dismissal of my part was a smoldering anger and a disappointment. I was bitterly disappointed, but I didn't believe him at all. But that's understandable, said the boy quickly. When the vampire paused, his expression of astonishment softening. I mean, who would anyone have believed him? Is it so ununderstandable? The vampire looked at the boy. I think perhaps it was my vicious egotism. Let me explain. I love my brother, as I told you, and at times I believed him to be a living saint. I encouraged him in all his prayer and meditations, as I said, and was willing to give him up to priesthood. And if someone had told me of a saint in Arles or Lourdes who saw visions, I would have believed it. I was a Catholic. But I believed in saints. I lit tapers before their statues in churches. I knew their pictures, their symbols, their names. But I couldn't believe my brother. Not only did I not believe the visions, I couldn't endure the notion for a moment. Now why? Because he was my brother. Holy he might be, peculiar most definitely, but Francis of Assisi? No, not my brother. No brother of mine could be such. That is egotism. Do you see? The boy thought about it before he answered, and then he nodded and said that yes, he did, or at least he thought so. Perhaps he saw the visions of the vampire. Then you don't claim to know now whether he did or not. No, but I do know that he never wavered in his conviction for a second. That I know now, and knew then that night he left my room crazed and grieved. He never wavered for an instant, and within minutes he was dead. How? The boy asked. He simply walked out the French doors out in the gallery and stood for a moment at the head of the brick stairs. And he fell. He was dead when he reached the bottom. His neck was broken. The vampire shook his head in consternation, but his face was still serene. Did you see him fall? Asked the boy. Did he lose his footing? No, but two of the servants saw it happen. They said that he just looked up as if he had seen something in the air, and his entire body moved forward as if it was being swept by the wind. One of them said he was about to say something when he fell. I thought he was about to say something too, but it was at the moment I turned away from the window. My back was turned when I heard the noise. He glanced at the tape recorder. I could never forgive myself. I felt responsible for his death, he said, and everyone else seemed to think I was responsible as well. But how could they? You said they saw him fall. It wasn't a direct accusation. They simply knew that something had passed between us that was unpleasant. That we had argued several minutes before the fall. The servants had heard us, my mother had heard us, my mother would not stop asking me what happened and why my brother, who was so quiet, had been shouting. Then my sister joined in, and of course I refused to say. I was so bitterly shocked and miserable that I had no patience with anyone, only the vague determination that they would not know about this vision. They would not know that he had become finally not a saint, but only a fanatic. My sister went to bed rather than face the funeral, and my mother told everyone to the parish that something horrible had happened in my room, which I would not reveal. Even the police questioned me on the word of my own mother. Finally, the priest came to see me and demanded to know what had gone on. I told no one. It was only a discussion. I said, I was not on the gallery when he fell. I protested, and they all stared at me like if I had killed him. And I felt that I had killed him. I sat in the parlor beside his coffin for 2 days, thinking I had killed him. I stared at his face until spots appeared before my eyes. I nearly fainted. The back of his skull had been shattered on the pavement, and his head had the wrong shape on the pillow. I forced myself to stare at it to steady it, simply because I could hardly endure the pain and the smell of the decay, and I was tempted over and over to try and open his eyes. All those were mad thoughts. Mad impulses. The main thought was this. I had laughed at him. I had not believed him. I had not been kind to him. He had fallen because of me. This really happened, didn't it? The boy whispered. You're telling me something that's true. Yes, said the vampire, looking at him with a surprise. I want to go on telling you, but as his eyes passed over the boy and returned to the window, he showed only faint interest in the boy, who seemed engaged in some silent inner struggle. But you said you didn't know about the visions, that you were a vampire. Didn't know for certain whether. I want to talk about things in order, said the vampire. I want to go telling you things as they happened. Tattoo. That's enough. Excuse the interruption. No, I didn't know about the visions to this day, and again he waited until the boy said, Yes, please go on. Well, I wanted to sell the plantations. I never wanted to see the house or the oratory again. I leased them finally to an agency which would work them for me and manage things so I would never go there. And I moved my mother and sister to one of the townhouses in New Orleans. Of course, I did not escape my brother for a moment. I could think of nothing but his body rotting in the ground. He was buried in St. Louis Cemetery in New Orleans, and I did everything to avoid passing those gates, but still I thought of him constantly. Drunk or sober, I saw his body rotting in the coffin, and I couldn't bear it. Over and over, I dreamed that he was at the head of the steps, and I was holding his arm, talking kindly to him, urging him back into the bedroom, telling him gently I didn't believe him. Tattoo. Tattoo. That's enough. Sit. That he must pray for me to have faith. Meantime, the slaves on Point de Lait, that was my plantation, had begun to talk of seeing his ghost on the gallery. An overseer couldn't help overhearing. People in society asked my sister offensive questions about the whole incident, and she became a hysteric. She simply thought she ought to react that way, so she did. I drank all the time and was at home as little as possible. I lived like a man who wanted to die but had no courage to do it himself. I walked back streets and alleys alone. I passed out in the cabarets. I backed out of 2 duels more of an apathy than cowardice, and truly wished to be murdered. And then I was attacked. It may have been anyone, but it was a vampire. He came to me just a few steps from my door one night and left me for dead, or so I thought. You mean he sucked your blood, said the boy. Yes, the vampire laughed. He sucked my blood. That is the way it is done. But you lived, said the young man. You said he left you for dead. Well, he drained me almost to the point of death, which was for him sufficient. I was put to bed, and as soon as I was found, confused and really unaware of what happened to me, I suppose I thought that he had drank That drink had finally caused a stroke. I expected to die now, and had no interest in eating or drinking or talking to the doctor. My mother sent for the priest. I was feverish by then. And I told the priest everything, all about my brother's visions and what I had done. I remember I clung to his arm, making him swear over and over he would tell me no one. I know I didn't kill him, I said. It's that I cannot live now, that he's dead now after the way I treated him. That's ridiculous, he answered me. Of course you can live. There's nothing wrong with you but self-indulgence. Your mother needs you, not to mention your sister, and as for your brother yours who's possessed of the devil. I was so stunned what he said, and I couldn't protest. The devil made the visions. He went on to explain. The devil was rampant. The entire country of France was under the influence of the devil. And the revolution had been the greatest triumph. Nothing would ever save my brother but exorcism, praying, and fasting. Men to hold him down while the devil raged through his body and tried to throw him about. The devil threw him down the steps. It's perfectly obvious, he declared. You weren't talking to your brother, Norm. You were talking to Satan. Well, this enraged me. I believe that before that I had pushed to my limits, but I had not. He went on talking about the devil, about voodoo amongst the slaves, and cases of protesting in parts of the world. And I went wild. I wrecked the room in the process of nearly killing him. But your strength, the vampire, asked the boy. I was out of my mind, the vampire said. I did things I could not have done in perfect health. A scene of confused, pale, fantastical now. But I do remember that I drove him out of the back doors of the house, across the courtyard, and against the brick wall of the kitchen, where I pounded his head until I nearly killed him. Side note, I don't think I could blame him. When I was subdued finally, exhausted, then almost to the point of death, they bled me. The fools. But I was going to say something else. It was then that I conceived of my own egotism. Perhaps I seen it reflected in the priest. His contemptuous attitude towards my brother reflected my own. His immediate and shallow carping about the devil. His refusal to even entertain the idea that Saint Lucia had passed so close. But he did believe in a possession by the devil. That is much more mundane idea, said the vampire immediately. People who cease to believe in God or goodness altogether still believe in the devil. I don't know why. No, I do indeed know why. Evil is always possible, and goodness is internally difficult, but you must understand, possession is really another way of saying someone is mad. I felt it was for the priest. I'm sure he had seen madness. Perhaps he'd started right over raving madness and pronounced it to possession. You don't have to see Satan when he is exorcised. But to stand in the presence of a saint, to believe that Satan has seen a vision, no. It's egotism, a refusal to believe it could occur in our midst. I never thought about it that way, said the boy. But what happened to you? You said they bled you to cure you, and they must have nearly killed you. The vampire laughed. Yes, it certainly did. But the vampire came back that night. You see, he wanted Point de Luck, my plantation. It was very late after my sister had fallen asleep. I can remember it almost as it was yesterday. He came in from the courtyard, opening the French doors without a sound, a tall, fair-skinned man with a mass of blonde hair and graceful, almost feline quality to his movements. And gently he draped a shawl over my sister's eyes and lowered the wick of the lamp. She dozed there beside the basin and the cloth which she had bathed my forehead, and never once stirred under the shawl until morning, but by that time I was greatly changed. Part 3 will be continued in the next video. Thank you for watching thus far.